Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pitts. This is a frontline update for I'd say the 29th of June 2024. That's because that's what today is, but this update was done yesterday by JR. I then shot to London for a school reunion and was unable to either do this mapping update video, but also there have been some changes. So actually there are some changes to this mapping that I will talk about during the video because we have the tweaks for them from Suriyat Maps, but I haven't, or JR hasn't, either of us hasn't changed the mapping yet. So, and this is because I went on a jolly up to London all of yesterday afternoon and evening. And just as an aside to that, it's regarding a future interview on the channel. I would at this reunion. I was a very privileged kid because my dad was in the Navy. We lived around the world, and so I had to go to boarding school in the UK. And you're wondering what everyone's going to be like after 30 years, and etc. etc. And actually, everyone's sort of super lovely. And one guy who I wasn't particularly friends with, so we didn't really cross too much. Absolutely fascinating. Works as a social impact consultant, got his own consultancy, and works with like the UN and other entities on lots of things like the impact of social media and of your messaging and whatnot. But works a lot in the charity sector, and he works on disinformation and information. And he was particularly with regard to health, places like Africa and so on and so forth. He's agreed to come on for an interview because we had this 40-minute conversation last night about Russian disinformation and information. And it was absolutely fascinating about how you fight disinformation, or can you undo mistruths? No, you can't really. So what you have to do is present an even bigger case for actual information, and that's how you mitigate the disinformation. And which is fascinating because that's what I've been talking about with regard to presenting positive narratives to Russians about Russia and about the West, etc., etc. So really fascinating discussion I had last night. I'm hoping to get him on for an interview because that'd be really pertinent to what we talk about so often here. Anyway, that's a rather random aside. If you don't know what the lines on my map mean, please check out the video, the screen at the moment. Pause the video. So JR's done a mapping, thanks to him. I really appreciate that, mate. For yesterday, we're going to go up to the north, not to the two sectors in Kharkiv. Although I will say that it looks like the Ukrainians are successfully clearing out the Russians in Hlyobek. I think there's a bit of a delay with the success of the Ukrainians. I think in some of these areas it does come out eventually, but we don't get it super quick. We are actually going to go to further along this is still just inside Kharkiv Oblast. You've got Kharkiv city there. This is kind of northwest of there, where Deep State Maps has the enemy was pushed back in Solnitsky Kozachok. So possibly the Russians had pushed in, taken some land just across the border here, and the Ukrainians have pushed them back there. So that's interesting. Don't know any details about that, to be honest. I'm not going into the Deep State Map. Not going into the Institute for the Study of War, American Military Think Tank mapping, just because of time. We do have a Suriyat Maps. I presume is that not on? So we're going to go over to Vovchansk. It might not be on this map. This might be one of the updates that we haven't done yet. Yes. So this is the Ukrainian army re-entering position south of Haharina Street in Vovchansk. Fighting with the Russian army continues throughout the city with great intensity. There are these ideas. I was listening to. It was either Andrew Perpetual or Ukraine the Latest talking about how there are these raids. I think it was Andrew Perpetual's live stream last night. That's what I do sitting on the train, obviously. The Russians do keep doing these attacks, or not, kind of raids, if you like, to get to these guys cut off in the aggregates area here. But it's not that. And this is the difference between Suriyat Maps and Andrew Perpetua here. It's not that they control this area, that they can occasionally get across there, then they're cut off. And of course, that to Suriyat Maps shows a Russian control of the whole area, but it's not. It's just these raids to try and help these guys out a little bit. And I think maybe occasionally they do get through, and then often they don't. And it's still quite unsure as exactly what is going on there. Well, when we look here at Suriyat Maps, you can see that the control zone up to that aggregates area is a very thin area of land now admitted by Surayat Maps, and that's kind of what the others have been saying for some time, except that they are effectively cut off. So, and I would agree with that. I would say there isn't a Russian control across there. It is a grey zone. Occasionally they can get across, maybe drop some supplies, maybe get some wounded out. I don't even know if that's possible, but it's really difficult because both sides are lobbing aviation bombs into this area, and it must be pretty hellish, probably for both sides, right? But the Ukrainians are, I think, pressuring the Russians in this whole area in both of these two sectors, and the Russians, I think, are on the back foot a little bit and are ceding some territory while supposedly trying to shore up their defences. It's interesting that they're on the defence there now with their own troops from other areas of the front line. Now, coming on to the northeastern sector, there are no changes from Kupiansk to Svatovo to Crimea, apart from, yet again, we're hearing about this area in the Terny Torska sector. Now, Andrew Perpetua has the Russians being pushed back further here, and you can see there's a big difference between what Andrew says and both Deep State Maps and Surayat Maps, and this is an area where the Russians have been pushed back already. So they were out to here previously. They've been pushed back a second time, and actually in last night's live stream, Andrew said that they've been pushed back further. He got news that day that the Ukrainians are still keeping on pushing. Now, this is interesting. This is quite important, what's going on here. So it appears that the Ukrainians had the momentum here because the Russians have pulled troops back from here. It's a bit like what we've seen down near near Toretsk, where the Russians were able to capitalize on rotation of Ukrainian troops, and it all went a bit wrong, and they've basically been really opportunistic in taking this area there. Well, it seems like that has happened to some degree here on the inverse, where the Russians have pulled troops out. Ukrainians have realized that, attacked in this area, and are having consecutive days of taking land back, which then gives the Russians pause for thought, because what the Russians supposedly are doing here is bringing troops from that sector up to around the Novoherivka area, and which is sort of there, Ryarodka, and then further north as well on towards Stelmakivka. The idea is that Borova is going to be on the cards for the Russians. They're building up forces here. They are going to push either or maybe both up here. Andrew says that the idea is probably going to be some kind of dogleg down, move up there, some kind of lightning attack, move up here and then down, take Borova, or also maybe across from there. We've heard that the Russians had amassed 10,000 troops in the area, and maybe 450 was it, pieces of equipment, both artillery and mechanized equipment, and that they are getting ready for a big attack. We haven't seen anything particularly yet. There have been small movements around Stelmakivka and maybe a little bit down here and down there, but actually nothing too significant at all. And you wonder whether they do have enough in the tank to achieve something like that. And then if that has entailed them pulling troops from elsewhere, it tells you that they don't have the deep reserves, that they're having to rob Peter to pay Paul in order that Paul can go on a jaunt. So that's interesting in and of itself. And then the Ukrainians then doing something like this and possibly getting further gains in that sector means that the Russians have to make a decision. Do they pull troops back from an area they're just about to attack in, an area of offensive, or do they just give up on this area here because it's not that important to them? It's more important they take Borova and try and get to the Oskil River. Interesting dilemma for them. And that's good news. I think the Ukrainians have done a really sensible thing there in counterattacking and then capitalizing on the momentum they have to make further inroads into the Russian lines and give the Russians a dilemma rather than a problem. Problems have solutions. Dilemmas have a worst case, the least worst option. So, yeah. That's what's going on there. We're going to come down to Past Seversk. No change there. No change to Chasiv Yar as according to yesterday's mapping at this point. However, if we look into some of the claims, there looks like there's going to be a change in the Bodanivka area. So last 10 days, this is a long over a longer period. Russian armies managed to capture new buildings of the Chazovoyarsk plant in the Canal microdistrict, as well as entering the forest south of Kalinivka, from where Russian troops begin to attack the defense of the Ukrainian armies in this section of the canal. That is to say, we're going to expect to see some changes to Syriac maps in this area. So they're taking a bit of land or a few buildings in the canal microdistrict, as well as moving into this forest area to the east of the canal, just south of Kalinivka there. So that could be on the cards. We'll see whether the other mappers agree with that. No report says of Chaziv Yar that geolocated footage shows that Russians have regained a foothold in Kalinivka and made progress inside the forest plantation south of it. Situation is dynamic as control over the village and surrounding area has been going back and forth for the last week. So he would agree that there has been gains for the Russians in that area. It doesn't go as far as the Canal microdistrict, but that the Russians have made some gains there. However, the caveat here is that, particularly in Kalinivka, you've seen that Syriac maps has been back and forward like a yo-yo, which is, I think, a good bit of rationale for having more confidence in Andrew Perpetch and Deep State Maps here, where they're like, we're just going to keep solid Russian control here. They will be attacking. This will be a grey area. We won't make any changes. Whereas Syriac Maps change. And of course, every time you see a Russian vehicle or soldier in any given area, it's Russian control. And of course, that will be the same for down here, where it's quite dynamic, as no report says. They have changed the mapping a little bit in this area, but actually, don't be too quick to assume that Russians are controlling areas where they are attacking into. But it could be writing on the wall there for the Russians trying to push further to the west in this northern part of the Chaziv Yar sector. No changes elsewhere to this front, including around Toretsk. Toretsk and these towns around here are getting absolutely hammered. This seems to be where the Russians are. Well, I don't know if it's. I don't think it's anything they'd be long planning, but again, it's opportunistic, where they found a bit of a weakness, rotation, mistakes made by the Ukrainians, and the Russians piled in, and at the same time, they seem to be hammering Toretsk even more with their missiles and aviation. So it's pretty hellish around there for the Ukrainians. Then when we come to Avdiivka, you can see no changes yesterday. There are a few things that Syriac Maps will be changing. So just no, that's not the right up. Here it is. So following the capture of Nova Alexandriivka, the Russian army began advancing north of the locality to advance on Vozdizhenka, which is a worry for the Ukrainians. So that's in this area towards this small settlement, which is the last place before you get to interdict the T0504 highway that connects Pokrovsk to Chaziv Yar, eventually Konstantinivka, Chaziv Yar. That's a super important road. It is, I wouldn't say it's under fire control, but it's dangerous. You can get hit going along there with Russian artillery, and every extra field that the Russians take in this area is a march towards that eventual destination. We also have no reports talking about the Sokol area there. So west of Avdiivka, the Russians move forward, although less slower than earlier this year. It can be assumed that after geolocating new footage, Russia controls almost all of Sokol and made additional gains east of Novopokrovska. Control over the latter is still disputed. So that is some gains inside Sokol, and that would be in line with what we already have, to be honest, pretty much. So that's just him updating his maps to have control in this general area. And then as we move further down south, there's no change to the Pervomaisky area, I don't think. There is some change here in Krasnohorivka. So Andrew Perpetch's taken out that area there where we had the weird Ukrainian counterattack that took place at some largely unknown period of time where there were Bradleys and all sorts operating down here, but we couldn't quite work it out because the Russians controlled everywhere else around there. Anyway, all the mappers are now changed to have that under Russian control now. But there have been some further changes here, as according to Syriac maps. If we go to Krasnohorivka, here it says, so what do we have? In addition, Russian army began to press on the 2 axes in Krasnohorivka town, the aim of surrounding the hospital and micro-district. Combat with the Ukrainian army takes place on the streets of Lomonosova, Voroshlova, Tostoho, Khmelnytskoho, and outside the agricultural technical school. But anyway, there's a hospital. They're attacking on the northern part of the eastern flank, as well as coming up from the south there. So we don't have that on my map yet, but that will be up here near the hospital and down here as well, looking to sort of cut off the Ukrainians here by joining those 2 flanks together. And yeah, it's looking difficult in Krasnohorivka, that is for sure. We also have claims about, so where is this? That's Pervomaisky, isn't it? Onwards. So this is interesting. It's further down to the south, and this is in the Mariinka area. So Mariinka onto Herivka, and then onto then Maximilianivka. So the Russians making some gains into there with a little bit of advancing around this area there. So that'll be updated on the next map as well. And that's a little bit worrying. The Russians are making fairly consistent gains going towards Kurakova, which is a very key place there. You've got the reservoir, you've got a major road. It then comes down to join Velika Novosilka. This is one of the big intentions, one of the big objectives for the Russians there. And north of there, it's more difficult. You've got a lot of, Andrew Perpetch talking about this on his live stream last night, you've got a lot of physical geography to contend with if you're attacking. This is very much an area that the Ukrainians will be happy to defend. Fortifications are good there. The landscape works in their favour. This will be difficult for the Russians to take. Down here, possibly easier, especially if they can get to Kurakova. Then you'd be thinking Vuhledar would be, you've got Novomikhailivka onto Konstantinivka, and then you could cut that off. This whole area, I think, is going to be one of the main intentions for the Russians here. Anyway, Syriac Maps says there that the Russian forces made small advances on the eastern outskirts of Maximilianivka, and then going on to just above Konstantinivka, above Novomikhailivka here. So we come to the south. Andrew Perpetua, actually that's to the south of Novomikhailivka. So here we have Novomikhailivka, that had been a graveyard of many pieces of Russian equipment, 320 odd, wasn't it? They lost taking that. I mean, it's all been very expensive around here, but they are grinding on, as is their wont, and they're moving through Paraskevivka and getting dangerously close to Konstantinivka, as according to Syriac Maps again, and actually, according to them, of quite a vast amount of land here. All of this area has been taken by the Russians, so you expect to see that change to the mapping going forward. Andrew Perpetua has a small gain for them going further south in these tree lines. They've got video evidence to suggest they're attacked here, I think, with tanks and whatnot, and taking tree lines and having a successful maneuver there. And then, as we see, there are no changes to the rest of the mapping. All quiet on the southern front with regard to mapping changes. Velika Novosilka sector seems to have quietened down around Staromyorska and Orozhany. Robotina seems to have quietened down, although I'm sure it's hellish fighting still. But there's been no change in the mapping there for some time. And then Dnipro River seems to be fairly stable as the Ukrainians have pulled back across the river there. So that's the update for today. Hope that's useful. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe and share. Hit that bell. Like the video. All the kind of YouTubey stuff that is supposedly good. And I'll speak to you soon.